Hi, this is Brennan Davis from Bedrock Games and the Bedrock blog, and I'm here with Adam Balderstone, and we're holding the fort Dirty Harry style while Joel is tending to some things. So we're not going to have Horror Express this week, but we're going to talk about Dirty Harry. We're going to talk about the first film, Dirty Harry, which I'm sure everybody knows, but for those who don't know about it, it's a Don Siegel film. It was released in 1971, and the synopsis, which I pulled offline, is when a madman calling himself the Scorpio Killer menaces the city, tough as nails San Francisco police inspector Dirty Harry Callahan is assigned to track down and ferret out the crazed psychopath. So that's the synopsis. Adam, how long has it been since you've seen this movie?
I probably haven't seen this since the 80s, so it's been a very long time.
Okay. And I
Yeah.
I rewatched
Honestly,
it.
I remembered the Mad Max parody better than I remembered the movie
Okay.
itself.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, I saw it again, I think over the summer. I forget when. I gave myself like a nice Dirty Harry marathon and I watched them all in order. But prior to
yeah.
that, the last time I probably sat down and watched it would have been like in the 80s or 90s. Like it was one of these films that it was all of the Dirty Harry movies were airing when we were kids, I feel, in syndication.
Yeah.
And when we were kids, this movie was only like what, 13 years old or something, 12 years old. I mean, you're a little older than I am, so maybe different for you. But
Yeah, I was born 1 year before this. I was born a year after this movie.
okay. All right, I was born in the bicentennial, so I'm 5 years after it. But in the early '80s and the mid '80s is when I really remember seeing it all the time on TV, and it was still, it was just barely a decade old at that point, right? It came out in '71, so somewhere between
Mm-hmm.
'83 and '86. It wasn't that old, and now it's like I don't even want to do the math because I know it's going to be heartbreaking to realize how old it is.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
Uh,
yeah.
but it's probably 50 something years old at this point, isn't it?
It is 50.
Yeah.
I think.
Okay.
No. It'll be, yeah, it is 50 actually. Oh
Okay.
my
See.
God.
Yeah.
Oh my
So
God. Yeah.
I mean, so that's like us now talking about a movie that came out in like 2008 or something, or 2009. You know
Sure.
what I mean? So,
Sure.
so it was still very fresh, but it was one of these films that was, had a huge impact on the culture. You couldn't grow up in the '80s and miss Dirty Harry references. All of the action movies that were coming out in the '80s, especially the buddy cop films, like all of
Yeah.
them paid homage or were, either blatant ripoffs of things in Dirty Harry or just this was like the template for every rogue
Well, that
cop type movie,
it,
right?
It was buddy cop and road cop movies, and I mean, and that was one thing I liked about this is that because it wasn't because it is the original and not just something down the line. It's like it doesn't really have the cliche with the buddy cop thing entirely. It's like it
Yeah.
has elements that you'll see, but it isn't the watch them slowly become friends and then in the finale they
Yeah.
team up together and work. It's like it feels more organic than any of that.
Yeah, it also feels like, and again, I mean, I wasn't around at the time, so there's obviously films that could have come out before this that had things in them, but it feels
Mhm.
like a movie where you're seeing something emerge on the screen for the first time. And the reviews I've read of it
Yes.
all kind of indicate that. Like I went back and read like, Roger Ebert's review and other reviews, and some of the ones like it was somewhat controversial too. There were people who didn't like the movie, so reading those
Mhm.
reviews as well. But it
Yeah, but
definitely.
no, you're right about feeling like something, seeing something that's just emerging. Because a lot of times when you do go back to the first thing, sometimes because you've seen so many copies of it, you can't appreciate it as much. With this, this felt
Yeah.
very fresh actually for a 50-year-old movie.
I think the closest for a modern audience that hasn't seen this and didn't grow up watching the stuff we grew up watching, and this is still also an old reference, so maybe this won't work. But I feel like the apotheosis of this character in pop culture is
Uh-huh.
Jack Bauer. Like Jack Bauer is like the
Yeah.
culmination of the seed that was planted with this character,
Yep.
and the basic sort of. I mean, so number one, it comes out during like cultural revolution. Was this after the Manson killings? It must have been after the Manson killings.
This was after the
Yeah,
Manson
yeah.
killings. Yeah.
So yeah, okay. So it was after the Manson killings, and it's at a point where, and I want to say before, because this is a movie we're going to have to talk about social and cultural things attached to it, and we're going to talk
Yeah.
about like hippies and counterculture. I want to emphasize My parents are hippies. I love hippies. I'm a very big fan of hippies. I think they're all chill, nice people. But this is a movie where the villain is the embodiment of the counterculture. And so that's going to be relevant in the discussion. And it's also a movie that you can read it a number of different ways, but the political message that a lot of people would read into it can make some viewers uncomfortable. And I think we come from an era when, whether that was the case or not, you still would watch a movie if it was good, and you would engage with, even if you're disagreeing with the premise, you would engage with it.
This is definitely a movie where I have objections to things. I'm like, no, but that's worth discussing that too. But which we'll get into. But it is, I do enjoy the movie for other reasons.
So before, because you made a really good point before the podcast that I want to get into, but before we get to that point, I want to ask, what do you think the meaning of this movie is? Like, and you don't have to reduce it to one if you think there's multiple possible meanings. Just
well, the most blatant meaning is that the system is broken, and we need a real man who can work outside the system and do what needs to be done. Is basically the message. But
and I think that's like that's like the textbook sort of, that is what is Dirty Harry is described as, I think, for the most part.
There's layers to things. There is some complexity to this movie, so I don't want to just, but that is the basic fundamental thing you take away from this movie if you watch it.
And I think we'll get into the meaning a little bit later, but I would sort of agree. At the same time, I think my view, and it changes. It's a funny thing about this movie is my view of what it means actually changes a lot, and I think part of that has to do with the fact that Siegel is like a liberal. Like, I know he's got a statement somewhere where he said, like, I'm a liberal and Clint Eastwood is a conservative. And I have no comment on the meaning of the film. I forget the exact quote.
Here's the other interpretation. I'll break it out now.
Yeah.
That was the surface level boom description. But if you don't, it's easy to see this as a formula movie because we've had all the buddy cop movies and all of that. But this isn't. You could view this movie as a character study. Yeah. And it's this guy who's lost his wife just falling apart under this case. And at the end, he's just cracked. It's like, you don't have to view this as a cliche buddy cop movie or anything like that. You could view it as a character study. It's just this guy falling apart.
And I think another reading too is almost even more nihilistic, where the system is broken. It's not working. Like, clearly it's not working. The psychopath is back on the street.
That goes into my version too.
But,
I just said, it also fits.
But what that produces is Dirty Harry. That situation is what produces the Dirty Harry.
That is a good reading, because this is, it is a case of, even if you're on the left, you're like, wow, you're not in favor of this guy getting released into the street.
And the guy's a real piece of work too in this movie. So it's like, he's like, we'll talk about him later. But also the way, like, in that reading, the way that I see it, and I think this is backed up by, I want to get into this deeper later in the podcast, but there's a big shootout under a Jesus Saves sign where Harry is bathed in red light. He's bathed in red light. And then he gets beat up under a cross by Scorpio. And Scorpio literally cracks a bunch of his ribs. So it's very Jesus-like. Do you know what I mean? It's very Jesus-like. But I think what is going on is, number one, there's like a, and this isn't my idea. This is ideas these aren't all my original ideas. I've read articles where people have talked about different readings and interpretations, because the movie always makes me kind of want to probe deeper and find answers to some of my questions. Is one of the explanations I like is that, not literally but figuratively, they're the same person, Scorpio and Dirty Harry. That they're and that Harry is sort of, he's almost like losing his soul over the course of the movie. Do you know what I mean? Like the scene with the red light bathing on him, the scene in the football field where everything is like that is that's like a Jack Bauer scene. Like that's the moment where he's like, I'm going to torture this guy. To it's like the classic moral conundrum. There's somebody
It
buried
is.
alive.
It is done as a dark scene. There's
Yeah,
no sense of, yeah, this dude's getting what's coming to him. It definitely frames it as, yeah, the way it pulls away and everything. It's like
and
bad stuff is happening here.
like Harry is transforming in that scene, right? Like there's something going on.
Yeah,
It's like something's going
yeah,
on. So I think another reading is that, like I said, like the system is broken and that produces Dirty Harry. But what that is that's you're taking somebody who's basically a good guy and he's becoming a bad guy, or maybe
yeah.
he was a questionable guy. I don't know, but he start, you know what I mean? And so,
It's yeah. It's. I mean, you've also got to think too that if this were the more standard reading, you know, his partner dropping out and just, it's like I feel like that would have been the scene where he talked like we've got to stop this guy, and like would have pulled him back in and
yeah.
it kind of would have gone on, but it's like that isn't how it happens. He's like, yeah, this is you're making the right choice here. This is a good idea. Quit.
So it's
It's
it's multi-layered, and I think we'll
yeah.
definitely get into that. But you had made the point. I think you had said you had made a number of points, so I want to make sure I'm getting the right one that you wanted to talk about. But you had said something about it, like the movie changes meaning depending on whether this is one film or part of the series, and so
Yes. Yes.
um, and I thought that was an interesting thing, because when you take this movie in isolation, I feel it's much darker and more nihilistic, and
Yeah.
I'm increasingly more inclined to, like, I don't know, not read it as particularly right wing or left wing. It's almost a critique of both right wing and left wing extremities, I think, when you really,
It
because
is.
it's like obviously Scorpio embodies the the most extreme thing you can imagine on the left. Harry is embodying the thing that you can imagine on the right emerging. And by the end of the movie, I mean, he does save the day. He does all these necessary things, but the cost is I mean, he's violating rights. Like they lay it out very clearly over the course of the movie that, do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? And again, some of the rights are newly acquired rights because of recent court decisions. So
Yeah.
you can read it as commentary on those court decisions too. But I don't know, by the end of the movie, the fact, the fact that he throws away his badge. There was one article I had read on this where they said in the end, there's, it's sort of like a clash of authoritarianism and freedom. Like the hippies represent
Yes.
the freedom, he represents authoritarianism, and in the end, you're left with neither freedom nor law and order. Like, you know what I mean? So, I'm sorry, a clash of law and order and freedom, and in the end, you're left with neither.
Hmm.
And I think
Yeah.
that seems like when I read that, I was like, that is the most accurate to me. That's the one that resonates the most. That feels like that's getting probably closer to what the director might have had in mind.
Yeah.
Um,
It becomes more right wing seeming when you add the sequels on, because he
yes,
just goes on becoming a cop. Then boom, it validates everything he did in the movie. It's like, yeah, he was the good guy, and people came around, and
yeah,
so that is why, yeah, you can't read this movie with its true reading and have any of the sequels factored in.
and I think the more, and again, I think what tends to happen, like I think the first time you watch it or when you're going by memory, you just kind of remember the, like, badass Dirty Harry sort of,
Hmm.
well, I'm all broken up about this man's rights, those kind of lines, and it's
Yes.
very much like it definitely, I mean, and it is a reaction to the counterculture and to things and to maybe some of the unforeseen consequences of the counterculture, but at the same time, uh then when you watch it again, you're like, wait, that light bathing him in red, like that is not how you depict a hero, especially when, like, you have, like,
Yeah.
Jesus saves getting shot apart above him, and then you have this
Yeah.
scene under the cross. Like that seems. I don't think the messages are religious, but I feel like they're invoking religious imagery for a purpose. It doesn't feel like it just doesn't feel random, or like, oh, we're just gonna put this cross here because crosses are meaningful and
Well, I
fill you with
will I
emotion.
will qualify one thing. I do think you're onto something, but I
Hmm.
will say San Francisco is a Catholic founded city, and there are a lot of a lot
True,
of
true.
crosses in
Yeah,
San Francisco.
that's true. No, that's true. But I also feel like there's a difference between, like, say you have crosses in the background versus this guy is getting like
I know.
figuratively
I take your
crucified
point.
under the
I just
cross.
say
Um,
there's a lot of
but
them around.
but also, like, when you look at like the parallels in the movie, like the first scene where he says go ahead make my day, right? That
Yeah,
scene, he's actually like, it's kind of whimsical and merciful at the same time. Like he's laughing when he says when he pulls the trigger and there's no bullets in there, right? Like,
yeah,
do you know what I mean?
yeah.
And when he says, well, do you feel lucky? There's a lightness to it. The second time when he does it with Scorpio, he's not in control of his emotions when he says, "Do you feel lucky, punk?" And he kills
No.
the guy. Do you know what I mean? So it's like the beginning of the movie. That's just like something he does to make. Maybe he uses that as a technique to scare people straight, or give them a sense of, like, having a second chance. Do you know what I mean?
Well, it was well. I mean, it was also by doing that, he's trying to talk him out of grabbing the gun because he does.
yeah,
He's saving the guy's life by doing that.
yeah,
That was an act of mercy.
yeah.
So, yeah,
And in
it's
this one, it's like he clearly wants to kill Scorpio. That's like,
yeah,
he
he's gonna
just,
kill.
yeah,
He's only there to kill him. There's
yeah.
no other purpose in him being there. Yeah.
Um, so yeah, but yeah, I don't know. Adam, can you talk for a few moments? Because I actually have to blow my nose, and I it's
Okay.
just start talking about Scorpio, because I think we need to talk about him, and I'll catch up once I get back. It'll take me 2 seconds.
Okay. Okay. Wow. So Scorpio, talking to myself here. He's no, it's a great performance by Andy Robinson in this. He's just extremely unhinged, as we mentioned earlier. He is unfortunately the only, I think, counterculture figure we get in this movie. We don't really have any other characters we see, but I mean, he honestly comes off as the guy who's like the creepy weirdo who. Okay, I'm gonna repeat myself here a little bit. I'm just saying that I think Scorpio, he's, we don't see any other counterculture characters in this
Yeah.
movie, but he doesn't feel like he's part of the counterculture as much as the creepy weirdo who shows up sometimes and wants to be, and no one wants anything to do with him. You see, that's kind
Okay,
of how it comes off to
that's
me.
interesting. Yeah,
You do kind of see that in fringe scenes sometimes, whether it's geek culture or
yeah.
alternative culture back in the '80s or whatever. But yeah,
I mean, that's. I mean, so I think, like, again, growing up with hippies, that seems right to me, that he's not an accurate representation of what the counterculture and what hippies were, right? Like
no,
he
not at
what
all.
what I read him as is, I feel he's sort of the grotesque thing that people on the right see in the counterculture. Do you know what I
Oh,
mean?
he is
Yeah.
that too. Yeah,
Uh,
that's a yeah. I'm trying to make a reading where I actually make him a real person, but
mm.
that is also a fair reading.
Well, because he's so over the top. Like one of the things that, and I love this about the character and the
Yeah,
performance.
yeah, it's
He
a great
is he is like repugnant in how he delivers some of these lines, and in a way that's like, I don't think I've ever seen anybody act a character in this way.
No, it's a really memorable performance. That's one thing that stuck with me since the '80s is that character. It's like I remember him.
He's just so, I don't. He's like coming apart at the seams at times. Like
Yeah.
and what's interesting, he's so evil. And again, what's also kind of interesting about this character is, like, I was watching a discussion somewhere about Dirty Harry, and somebody was like, "Well, go see Zodiac or whatever, like the kill. That's a much better representation of serial killings." And I was like, you're really missing the point. Like serial killers were a new concept to most people at this time. Like they're obviously the Zodiac killer is obviously on what this is modeled after.
Oh yeah.
But nobody
Right.
nobody knew, like, all the things we know about serial killers, and so there's all kinds of things with this character that make zero sense because
Yeah.
serial killers don't do that. But that's what's interesting about it, is that serial killers are such a new concept to people and so scary. They can project all of this evil onto him. And
Well, the other thing too is this guy's a little different than a serial killer too, because I mean, serial killers do have a protective instinct, whereas
yeah,
this guy basically is coming apart at the seams and doing
yeah,
these big spectacle things trying to get attention. It's like serial killers usually aren't trying to
no,
get attention.
no, and again, I think that comes down to like they didn't really have like they didn't have all the documentaries and stuff that we have, where we know the if you're if you watch crime shows and stuff, you kind of get a sense of what a serial
Yeah.
killer is, and I think they're focused on psychopathy too here. I know that that was like a big sort of idea at the time, that like like the new type of killer is like the psychopath killer. You know what I mean?
I think you're right
Yeah,
about that
but
being a big trend at the time.
I think they're sort of trying to make sense of things like the Manson killings. This
Uh-huh.
idea of like the Zodiac killer, like all these things, and so. Number one, he kills people with a sniper rifle, which is, I mean, we had the guy that
I
just did that in
know.
Washington D.C., but it's rare, right? It's not like a normal.
Yeah.
It's an odd MO. But he also does other things too. So like he kills people with a sniper rifle, but then he also murders young girls and like buries them in wells, and
Yeah.
he robs liquor
That's what I'm saying.
stores. Yeah,
He whatever kind of killer he is, it
yeah.
doesn't fit with serial killer at all.
But
But
who who he reminds me of the most actually is the Night Stalker.
yeah, 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 I
That's
go with that.
who I mean was much later, but that's the one that for some reason I don't know why he just kind of that just like totally chaotic, antisocial. I don't know, if like this Night Stalker embodied what everybody was afraid of with like metal and Satanism, this guy
Hmm.
embodies what everybody's afraid of with the counterculture at the time. Not everybody, but what certain people are afraid of.
Yeah,
But I think that over the top performance works because you need to feel the repugnance that Harry feels for him, and so him going from being evil and sadistic and in control to the moment he gets hurt, screaming like I don't even know what that sound is that he was making, but he gets
it's it. Yeah,
he can't even
it is
believe he's been hurt. It's beyond belief that he's been hurt, and he doesn't know how to handle it, and he freaks out. Right? He's so fragile when he actually gets wounded. And also, there's like a lot of other things on him because he represents the counterculture, but he's also bigoted. Like he's a bigoted serial killer because he's going after black people, and at one point it looks like he might be going after homosexuals too. I remember there's a scene where
yeah, yeah. That was I was wondering about that scene. I was like, are we supposed to be reading these people as gay or not? I'm not certain.
I read it that
But
way. I read it that way.
that was the way I read it. Yeah, but I just yeah, I was so yeah, I agree with you on that. But
And
yeah, that which is an interesting thing. Like you're saying, him being the counterculture figure, but he goes after black
yeah,
people and children and gay people.
but
So
then in the context of post Manson, that makes sense because Manson's trying to start a race war.
yes,
So you can sort of
yes,
see where that piece of the puzzle is coming from. And even though like Harry is presented as like there's this mystery of why is he called Dirty Harry, and one of the reasons it's given early on is that he's racist against everybody basically. But then he winks, and it's like it's not a real answer. And over the course of the film, you get the sense that he's actually very open-minded about different people and groups. Like,
yeah.
it
I
doesn't
don't think
seem.
he cares. I
Yeah,
don't think he cares. I mean, there's no sense, with the partner that was an issue. I
yeah.
mean, it's
and and the thing that's sort of funny about the series is what they end up doing is so in this one he gets paired up with a guy I think it was Mexican named Chico, and
yeah,
and so it's but in every series they kind of pair him up with another like the next guy, the next partner is black, and then it's a woman, and then they kind of stop that pattern I think. And no, then they have him pair up with an Asian partner in the fifth movie, but by then the steam is of the series is kind of waning anyway. So
yeah, yeah.
and I would actually say that's if you're gonna pick a movie that's the most like the most genuinely offensive Dirty Harry movie, it's probably the fifth one on a number of different levels.
Interesting. Yeah.
This movie's actually in a lot of ways kind of oddly enlightened in some ways. Do you know what I mean? And
Yeah, there's real intelligence behind this movie, definitely.
Um, so I don't know. I mean, I don't know if there's much more to talk about with the meaning of the movie, but I did want to get that out of the way because that's like obviously one of the first things, you
Yeah,
know. And I should say one of the charges that gets thrown at the movie often is that it's a fascist film, that Dirty Harry is fascist, and
it's
he's
anti-fascist because a fascist would just do what he was told by the chief.
that's a good point. That's an interesting point.
It couldn't be. Well, I'm not defending fascism in any way whatsoever. This movie could not be less fascist.
I I think what they mean by that is sort of using violence
I know,
like
but
that
that's just
to
not.
achieve. Yeah,
That's just not. You're ruining the term fascism and just making
fair
it mean
enough.
nothing.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
That's. It's like not you specifically. I just mean the general you people doing that. I'm just. It's like no, it means a very
Yeah.
specific thing.
Well, I think I also feel like whenever I read film criticism that fascism is used very broadly. Like it has like a slightly different meaning. I feel like than how I would use the
It
term.
means yeah,
Yeah,
any kind
uh,
of violent person I
yeah.
don't like in the
Like
critical world. I think.
I think a more accurate statement is that Dirty Harry is potentially a vigilante. That's the thing that he is in danger of
Oh
becoming in the
yeah,
movie.
vigilantism
Yeah,
isn't fascism.
yeah,
Once again, fascism. You got the Führer, and
yeah.
you got all the people under him, and they all do what the Führer says.
But
No room for vigilantism.
but it's interesting to see it sort of you know, it's like post Miranda rights, all that stuff. There's been a number of decisions that and and what oh here's the topic. Here's the topic that we were talking about before the podcast. We were saying how this is clearly a movie that's of its time. Like you cannot fully separate Dirty Harry from this reaction to the counterculture that's going on and all the stuff that was in the air at the time. Um, and a lot of movies that do that, I think you and I would tend to agree, uh, regardless of whether it's left or right. Sometimes that can really bog down a film. Like that can make a film
Oh
it
yeah,
can derail the story, right? Like you have a story and then they need it to go a certain direction for the message. It gets into like edutainment territory or what, or just or just the writer giving a political screed, whether it's a good or a bad screed, whether it's a screed you agree with or not. But some movies that do that or utilize that kind of messaging still seem to work, even if they're tied to a particular cultural thing. And Dirty Harry seems to be one of those movies and
yeah, it
I'm
does.
and I'm wondering why because a lot of films that do what Dirty Harry do, I'd probably be pretty irritated at, or if not irritated, I'd be like rolling my eyes at. Well, this is what I would expect in 1971 from what I
Well,
mean, just that kind of a
for
thing.
one, yeah, for one thing, the villain in this is genuinely compelling. It's like in
Yeah,
a lot because he is clearly once again set up as the evil
yeah,
bad guy, no question. But he's an interesting evil bad
yeah,
character. You want to watch him. He doesn't just feel like a straw man that's there for Harry to shoot at the end. So that's important. But yeah, it's just a well-made movie overall. I mean,
yeah,
the acting's good, the pacing's good, the direction's good. There's just the developments of the police work is interesting to
yeah,
watch. It's just I enjoyed every moment of this movie just going
yeah.
through it. So it's like any ideological objections I have are in the background. The fact that yeah, I'm
Hmm.
really enjoying this movie.
Yeah, I was also thinking like I think because it's sort of putting its finger on like a particular like a very something that was like a genuine fear emerging at the time around crime and crime sort of being out of
Yeah,
control
well,
and
yeah,
and then that leading to the discussion like this forever discussion that we've been it's not even though they're dealing with stuff unique to that period, it's sort of an ongoing always happening conversation of how to balance rights and law and order and all these things. So I feel like
yeah. Well, there is no perfect balance, so the
yeah,
conversation never ends. You
yeah,
just make sure, hope it gets
yeah.
nudged back in the right direction when it goes too far.
And again, I think some of the ambiguity of it too, like where on the one hand it does seem to be saying something, but then you get like these hints that maybe that's not the case. Then when you go back and rewatch it, you're forced to sort of think of the movie in a different way. I think that's
Yep.
another reason why it lasts. So I think movies where it's like there's one clear message, and that message is the only real one that you can take away from the film, unless you're being deliberately obtuse about it. those ones are the
Yeah.
ones that tend to have the bigger problem. But if there's like more texture to it, and more nuance and layers, it's even if it's not visible on your first viewing, I think that that's something that makes it interesting, because I feel like every one of the hallmarks of every Dirty Harry discussion is people having this involved conversation about what it means, and even if like they disagree with everything they think the movie's about, like it produces this engaging conversation somehow. So something about the way it handled it, I don't know, just
Yeah.
leads to interesting discussions.
Yeah, it is a good conversation starter movie. Because most movies that have or at least are accused of having an ideology don't make for interesting conversations, which is the worst thing about them. It's like
Yeah.
it's just telling you something and you can agree or disagree and there's just no complexity to unpack. So,
Yeah, I would agree with
maybe if
that.
you agree with the movie, you can just enjoy it for, feeling validated. That's
Yeah.
all it can do for people.
And if you disagree with it, you could just get angry. It's like, like those are the two.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. This is one where I found, because when I was young, I felt that I disagreed with the message, Jimmy, because I had a very simple interpretation of the message as a kid, but I found the movie so compelling. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think that's,
Yeah.
uh, you know, sometimes too, I like movies that do that to me. I like movies and books where it's like, I don't really agree with this person has to say, but I'm really interested in the conversation that's unfolding here.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, so, I guess, in terms of, other observations about the movie, like, any additional thoughts on, I don't know, any key scenes that you liked, anything that, stuck out at you this time watching it that you maybe didn't notice before?
Let's see. Yeah, well, it's hard to compare it to before because it's been so like I said, I literally do remember the Mad Magazine version better. I can remember all the frames of
Yeah.
that, but yeah, at the end he throws his SAG card away instead of his badge. But so,
I mean, and the parodies kind of have more currency than the movie itself, almost, right? Like,
well, at the time I saw this back then, I mean, I was a kid. I was more interested in Mad Magazine than slow-paced 70s
Okay.
cop movies.
Yeah, I have to admit, I must have had a thing for these like Clint Eastwood movies for whatever reason. I remember watching a lot of grainy, gritty 70s cop movies and action movies, and a lot of them were always Clint Eastwood movies or Clint Eastwood adjacent in some way, like a Charles Bronson type movie or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I didn't get into those movies till later. So, for the most part, it's something I really started to appreciate and enjoy. But
Okay.
yeah, I mean, I'd see a lot of them. But...
Well, I think what it was is a lot of time when you were a kid that age in that time, it was really boiled down to what's on TV, right? And so
exactly.
I lived in Southern California. This is the period that I most remember it, and this was on syndication, like, on the channel that they played. There was this transition from the afternoon cartoons to like the syndicated sitcoms to like the evening sitcoms, right? And somewhere in between they would play a movie, or somewhere after they would play a movie, and it was always movies like this. I feel, always these like 70s films that were, usually
there's like westerns or cop films for the most part. Those were the two most popular genres.
And I wasn't as into the westerns. I wasn't as into. I had to watch them.
I hated westerns when I was a kid for some reason. I just could. I really started to enjoy them in my 20s, but I know
why. I know why we didn't like them, because they were our parents' genre.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, that is it. I was just automatically, even though I just was bored from them from the beginning, and I wanted nothing to do with them.
Well, it was one of these things where, like, I feel like maybe not even just probably our parents and our grandparents, because I know my grandparents used to watch them too. I feel like it was just one of these. It was just an old genre that it was sort of like, it was very old fashioned. By the time we came around, you would have movies like Silverado and stuff like that coming out, but
Silverado. I was like, yeah, actually, that was earlier than I had to think about that.
I think it was like 86, right? Silverado, wasn't it?
That sounds about right. I remember I watched. Yeah, I remember I saw that with my grandfather. But...
The only Western movie I really remember liking a lot as a kid, before like, when I got older, I started getting into them more. But was Pale Rider. Pale Rider, for some reason, I really liked. But that was a Clint Eastwood
Okay.
movie, so maybe that was why. I don't know. Um,
Yeah, I did like some of the Clint Eastwood ones, but it's just on the whole, I hated the genre. I think the Clint Eastwood ones I watched because of Clint Eastwood, and
yeah.
I
You,
just, you know,
you know what it is too about that genre is the scenery is very uniform in color, and I think that is a big part of why everything's brown. Everything
yeah,
is brown and dusty,
and
and
they,
you
yeah, and
know,
I think that looked really even worse on those TVs. That's one thing to remember when we
yeah,
talk about these movies. We were watching in those little square
yeah.
cathode ray
Well,
TVs, and if we were lucky, we had cable and we weren't having like snow on the
yeah.
screen from the rabbit ears.
Well,
But
you could see the screen on the, like you could literally see the TV screen on the old TVs. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Like the screen meant
so
something back
the,
then.
the scenic
Uh,
vistas of the old
yeah,
west were just not coming across in those
yeah.
movies at all.
No, and the same. I mean, like that's how I remember the Dirty Harry movies. Is sort of these like these grainy and there's something off about the coloration of the movie too, either because the movie was a little bit older at that point and not restored, or because we were watching them on these crappy televisions and you like you used to have to fiddle with the colors on those like the tint and the color to get
Oh
everything
God,
right.
yes,
So
yes.
there's a lot going on. I guess another thing, just speaking of Clint Eastwood, is the fact that Clint Eastwood was one of these actors who basically played a persona in all of his movies, right? Like he always played
Yeah,
like the Clint character, right? Like he
yeah.
wasn't always called Clint, obviously, but like he was playing,
Yeah,
kind of
like how
himself.
Humphrey Bogart's always Humphrey Bogart.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I think that's another reason why Dirty Harry is appealing. Again, it's not, obviously Clint Eastwood isn't going around with the Magnum blowing people's brains out and stuff and enforcing the law, but you get the sense that there's like a very thin line between the persona you're seeing on the screen and the guy. Like obviously they're not the same person, but just that you
there's a well when
you
I mean the thing is, yeah, exactly. Because the westerns had already been made, it's like he's bringing all that
yeah,
with him into this movie. If
yeah.
you're watching it, it's like his audience who saw this when it came out already would have had that in their head.
It's not like watching like um a movie where you have somebody like Robert De Niro who plays like very different characters in a lot, especially his
Yes,
early movies. You know what I mean? Uh,
yes,
which is enjoyable for its in its own way. But one of the things that, and again, this isn't my original point. I've read this elsewhere, so I don't want to claim to it. But one of the things that I think makes a character like Dirty Harry appealing is because there's an authenticity about an actor who doesn't really play he isn't like tormenting himself between roles to come up with a new character. He's kind of playing this character that he always plays. Do you know what I mean? It's not really deceptive the way that when you see Robert De Niro in Taxi Driver, he's a totally different person, than when you see him in Goodfellas or the when you see him in The Godfather 2 or whatever. Like these are different characters. These are starkly different characters, and so it's there's an honesty in. You can also criticize it because he's not really he's not really playing a different role, but
I well, I don't really give that criticism
mm,
because I just find with actors, it's I mean, when you study acting too, a lot of things they teach you, it's good to have a persona. That's like an
okay,
easy way to get the fame. If you're the guy who does that,
yeah,
casting agents remember that. It becomes
yeah,
easier to get a career. So a lot of people do work on that, even if they're capable of more. Kind of honing that persona can be the way to go.
okay,
And
okay.
if you like that persona, why not keep doing it too?
Well, that's
There's
what
nothing
brings
really
you.
wrong with it. No
That's
one's
what
like,
brings you back to it.
why didn't Clint Eastwood play more nerdy guys? It's like no one's
Well, and
asking
didn't
for
we?
that.
Wasn't there? I might not have been in the Creature from the Black Lagoon we saw, but I think he played a scientist in one of the Creature from the Black
Yeah,
Lagoon
he
movies.
did. Of
Yeah,
course, that's
Eh,
before his career took
but
off. So
like, do we really? Nobody wants to see that, right? Like
yeah,
everybody wants. Yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
No, it's like he was really compelling
yeah.
nerd. Yeah,
No, it's not. I mean, even in his like later movies that he's directed, like he goes and he explores other themes, but it's a very natural progression from all of it. It's not like
yes,
it's like, okay, we're just watching him. This is an aged version of this persona. It's not,
yeah,
he's not a radically different person just because he's making his own movies now or something.
yeah.
So yeah, I think that's something that's also when I, and again, this is more apparent I think when you go and you watch the whole Dirty Harry series, but there's something very comforting about having this persona thread through the whole series. And
Yeah,
again, they
I
softened the
think
character a little bit with time, but
yeah, I think so backtracking a bit to the talking about people playing the same role all the
hmm,
time. I think what really bothers people is when people kind of go into autopilot over time, and it's like I
yeah.
don't know that Clint Eastwood ever went into autopilot. Maybe he did. You've watched more Dirty Harry movies than me, but any
I,
movie I've seen him in, he's at least he's been engaged with it to an extent.
I mean, I always like him in movies. I can't think of a movie where I've been like, oh man, I mean,
Yeah,
he's probably
that's
phoned
my
it in
point.
at some point, but like, it's never been as apparent to me if that's what he's
No,
doing.
but I
Um,
think a lot of times that's the complaint people are really making where
hmm,
they don't kind of realize it. It's just
yeah.
that the person is doing the same persona and they're doing it
Well,
less and
yeah.
less energy each time.
Well, what's interesting is even an actor like Robert De Niro, who wasn't persona based, eventually became a persona, and that became a
Yes,
very common criticism of his later
but
performances. Is what you're
I said
saying?
that's also part of the business too. I mean,
Hmm,
that isn't necessarily his choice, but
yeah,
his agent, the cats, the
yeah.
scripts that are coming his way, all of that is a factor.
Okay.
And that a lot of people end up playing the same role because that's what everyone wants to hire them for.
No, and I mean that makes sense. That makes sense. I'd like to do at one point like a discussion, like I'd like to pinpoint when that happens with somebody like De Niro because I find
Yeah,
yeah, I just know like at one point you looked up and suddenly he was playing the dad for Meet the Fockers all the time, or you know, it was like that kind of a thing. But
he definitely at some point. I mean, think about the fact too with De Niro though. He was someone that when he was serious about acting, he was incredibly gruelingly serious about it.
yeah,
And so I can see how he got to the point where it's like, you know what, I'm just gonna do light comedies.
yeah,
It's like I feel like he's someone that actually earned that.
yeah.
He's good.
And even then, like a lot of the persona that he embodies in the comedies is like a tough guy, and a lot of those early roles, even though they're
Oh yeah.
varied, they're all they're all dark or tough or so, you know, there's something, you know, there's a very dark streak through all those characters.
Yeah, and
And
I think De Niro, he's he likes to do lighter stuff now, but I think he's trying. I don't really get the maybe I don't know. I haven't seen as much of his recent stuff, so I really shouldn't weigh in on that. But
yeah, I haven't either. But I've just read
it's
a
been a
lot of
long time
complaints.
since I saw a new movie from him, so
I
I'm like, I better
the,
I retract my opinion completely.
and I'll even say this might be unpopular. I don't know, but I actually liked him in Meet the Fockers. I thought that was a
Oh
very
no, he is
entertaining
good.
role.
That was my
Yeah,
point. I was
yeah,
thinking talking about that, but I thought, wow, how long ago
yeah.
was Meet the Fockers? I don't even know. So yeah, that's why but yeah, he clearly likes doing comedies, no question.
No, and I think I mean, and he's, you know, even in movies where he was serious, there was always kind of an edge of humor
Yes,
sometimes, you know. So I could see
yes.
that there was like a dark sense of humor, but humor. Um, the only movie I didn't like him in, you know, again, and I'm like you, I haven't seen him in more recent movies, so I'm sure there's a lot of new ones that I could probably complain about if I saw them. I don't know.
Yeah.
Uh, I didn't particularly like him in Frankenstein, and I felt like that was just because it was a miscast. Do you know what I mean? It wasn't.
I yeah, I just didn't like that movie much, and
Hmm,
I kind of forgot about it
yeah,
about 10 minutes after leaving the theater. So
yeah.
I can't really weigh in much on that. But I didn't like that
I
movie.
tried to like that movie for a very. I wanted to
Oh, I
like it
was
so
so
bad.
excited for
Yeah.
that movie, but I
I mean,
no.
I deceived myself when I came out of that theater. I was convincing myself that I liked it, and it just.
Mm,
But then, like with every repeat viewing, you just can't. It's difficult to watch. It's not an easy movie to sit through,
no.
and Kenneth Branagh really like. I don't know. He's disruptive to it somehow. I don't know why. Like he's a good actor. I don't understand, but something went wrong in that movie.
Yeah, I don't remember it very
Yeah.
well at all because I kind of
Yeah.
didn't even spend any time thinking about it afterwards. I was just like, no, no.
Well, what's sad too is it's sad for a couple of reasons. Number one, the guy who did the soundtrack is amazing. What was his name? Doyle, something Doyle.
I don't
He's
remember the
brilliant.
soundtrack
It's a
actually.
brilliant soundtrack. It's got one of the best openings in like when that opening happened, I was like, wow, this is it. This is great. And then it was all
Uh-huh.
downhill from the opening.
Uh-huh.
Um, but it's also one of the few Frankenstein movies that's like, you know, a big Frankenstein movie, not like a made for TV or something. that
Yeah.
that is fairly true to the book. Like they do take some liberties, but it's fairly true to the book. And it's just a shame that it didn't. Maybe being true to the book isn't the way to make Frankenstein. Maybe that's the problem. I don't
Yeah,
know.
I think they should have taken some liberties here and there. I mean,
Yeah,
just as far as editing, trimming, that kind of
yeah,
thing. Because yeah, it just wasn't a well-paced movie.
yeah. I agree with that. But yeah, so I don't know, but with the Dirty Harry movies, and again, I know you haven't rewatched the new
No.
the series, so there's a limit to where this discussion can go, but I do find here's my thinking: the first Dirty Harry movie is a fun, not a fun, is a good.
Yeah,
Yeah, this is a wrong word. The
fun for
first
the
Dirty
whole
Harry movie is a
family.
good movie. It's well crafted. I think especially when you get to that scene in the football stadium, it's just clear this is like something is going on that's a little bit special with this movie. Do you know what I mean? Just
Yeah.
this, it's well paced. It does a really good job of keeping suspense. Like that scene when he's going from telephone booth to telephone booth, and
Yeah.
and
We called out the soundtrack yet? 'Cause the soundtrack
this
on this movie is really
okay.
good.
So the soundtrack, number one, I feel like the jazz flute is the flute that Anchorman is making fun of in the Anchorman movies. Do you know what I mean? Like that's how like I don't know. I don't know if that's the case, but I feel like that's what they had in mind when they decided to put a jazz flute in his hand. And
Oh,
even some of the notes sound kind of similar to some of but it's this really jazzy. They got like different instruments playing, and then they have like this drum track, and the drum track always seems to come on. It's doing it's function. It's got some kind of function to it. Do you know what I mean? Like
uh-huh.
it
Uh-huh.
really works. Like the rhythm of the like. Okay, I'll give you an example. Scorpio gets stabbed. I want to point out this is another cool thing about Dirty Harry that again another person came up with this idea where they're figuratively the same person. And if you watch the movie, a lot of things that happen to Dirty Harry happen to Scorpio and vice versa. So Scorpio gets stabbed in the leg. He ends up with a wounded leg and a limp. Dirty Harry early
Yeah.
in the movie gets shot in the leg, right? And and there's a
Yeah,
lot of
yeah,
that
yeah.
throughout the movie. Even though their hairstyles are different, they actually have similar type of hair and similar eyes. There's all these things about them. But the point about the soundtrack is that limping when Scorpio starts limping, which I think is where his character really starts to. I don't know. That's an important feature of his character by the end of the movie. It really
Yeah.
helps, and it works with the soundtrack because there's that jazz drumming that goes on when like I don't know what function it's serving, but it's sort of like when things are going to plan. That's when the drum beat kicks in, and when
Oh,
things
yeah,
kind of
I
go
need
off the
to
rail,
watch it again
like I
to
I
get that.
I might be wrong, but it's like something like that. Like we're
Uh-huh.
being distracted, so here's the flute, and then doop doop doop. Then the drums kick in, and we're. Do you know what I mean? It's
Wow.
really it works. I like it. It's
Yeah, I don't have your analysis, but just on a subconscious watching the movie level, the soundtrack is just absolutely perfect through this
yeah,
whole thing.
I agree. And it's not a soundtrack that you would be able to hum. It's kind of like a Sondheim
No.
thing. Like you wouldn't remember the melodies, but the vibe that it creates works
Yep.
really well. It works really
Yeah.
well.
Mm.
And it's kind of like the thing that we we got oversaturated with by the early 80s where like this turned into like elevator music being the soundtrack to a lot of like anytime they showed a city you had like
Yeah.
you had strings doing elevator jazz but this is like the
This is
more
the good version.
yeah, this is the good version. So yeah,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
agree.
exactly. This yeah, that's the thing. As you say, this really fits with the movie. That's what absolutely makes it work. If you're
Yeah,
just kind of laying jazz tracks over a car chase scene, it just becomes the laziest thing in the world by by 1980. But yeah, it's not doing that.
no, this is a cool movie where I feel, and again, my analysis might be a little bit off, but like something like that is going on, where what's going on visually and on the music and the visuals are all bound together in a very cohesive way. Like they
Yes.
just fit together, and I like when you feel like the soundtrack isn't just this other thing that they've added on, but it's actually part of like this the it's part of the physical medium now. Do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
uh, I don't know. And this is a movie where I noticed that, and again, I think it's interesting, especially because it's not like there's any powerful melody or chord
No, I
progression.
actually can't very clearly remember it right
Yeah,
now, but it just through the movie though, I was like, wow, this is perfect. As you
yeah.
say, it's not hummable, but it
It's
works.
yeah. The drumming has so much to do with like that drum beat is
Yeah,
just it kind of gets in you and like but you really see it with the with when he's limping and the drums are playing and he's like that scene when he goes to the liquor store. I feel like that's a scene where you see it.
yeah.
So yeah. So one of my other thoughts about Scorpio is I always feel like he really reminds me of David Foley, and I'm hoping that there's some kind of lost Kids in the Hall sketch somewhere where they're doing Dirty Harry and he gets to play like I don't think I've ever seen him play Scorpio in a sketch, but I feel like that's something that is hopefully out there somewhere where there's like this lost Dave Foley sketch, and he's
Oh,
because he look doesn't he look exactly like him? Like there's a
I can see a resemblance. I'm calling up a picture of him right now.
it's the expressions. It's like how his face comes alive when he gets animated. Do you know what I mean? It's the
Yeah. When you're talking from an expression perspective, I definitely get it.
like when Dave Foley is losing it and when this guy is losing it, there's a real similarity between them, you know?
Uh, that's funny. I've got a friend that's a big Dave Foley fan, so I'll have to bring this up to him.
Yeah, it's one of these things. But but with the series, the the thing that I think is interesting is that conversation. The movie, like this movie is like the well crafted, good movie. The series, the other movies, is where Dirty Harry gets fun, if that makes sense. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
how I would put it. That's maybe how I justify to myself liking the whole series. You know what I mean? Like because the
Oh, I
movie,
think it's fine to like them, but I think you should critically think about the first movie by itself. And then
yeah,
there's
I
these other
agree.
movies too, and you can just
I agree.
enjoy those on their own terms. So yeah, I don't have a
Yeah,
problem with
I agree. This is clearly a movie that's meant to be one movie, and then you get a series attached to it,
that. Yeah.
and and it's interesting too because usually when that happens, the whole like the series ends up corrupting the original movie. Somehow that doesn't happen here. Like this movie,
Uh-huh.
it's still to me it still stands the test of time. It hasn't been infected by whatever is going on in the series in any way. Like that just tends
Yeah.
to happen with sequels where they somehow like The Matrix is a classic example where the sequels just infected the first movie and there's no way around it. But Dirty
See, I
Harry,
never watched the sequels, so I am immune.
okay, well, yeah, I can
I forget what was going on, but like by the time I heard how bad the second one was before I got around to seeing it, so I was just like, all right, never,
it's
and
sort of the
it
second
saved
one
me.
was bad, and then the third one is like it gets even worse. That's
Uh-huh.
my memory. Maybe other people feel different,
Well, now there's
but
another one on the way,
yeah,
so
I'm
I'm
not
sure they'll
watching it.
fix it.
I'm not watching it. And I actually like their other movies. I liked Atlas. I haven't seen
Cloud Atlas is
Jupiter,
fun.
but I like some of their other movies that came later. But they just ruined The Matrix with it. It was perfect. It was perfect. And Dirty Harry is a perfect movie on its own, but
Yeah.
it's still a fun conversation. I feel like it's there are movies you want to keep talking about. What Dirty
Mhm.
Harry does a good job of is what it focuses on is the conversation that Dirty Harry produces. So in the second movie, it's basically, and I think the guy who wrote the second movie, I could be wrong. I think it's the guy. What's his name? The guy that John Goodman's character is based on in The Big Lebowski. There's like a screenwriter in
Oh,
Hollywood who he's
I
based on.
didn't.
John
I'm not up.
Milius. So I want to say, is it Milius? Is that his name?
Oh, Milius.
I think
Oh, he's
so.
based on. Oh, I totally see that. Okay, yeah, John Milius. Yeah,
Yeah.
okay, that
Um,
makes sense. I never thought who that was supposed to be, but yeah.
yeah. That. So I think he wrote the second one. I could be wrong because I'm not looking at the information on the second movie. So you can check that if there is, But either way, the second film is about how the police, like obviously Dirty Harry is a cop again because even though he
Yeah.
threw away his badge, and you can imagine like he's kind of a hero at the end of the movie, so it might be easy to bring him back into the police force. But the premise is there are elements within the police force that agree with Dirty Harry's methods. And there's this group of rogue cops that are going around that are literal fascists. They are literally
Uh-huh.
being fascists. They're going around like just executing criminals, just to be judge, jury, and executioner. and Dirty Harry has to contend with them. He ends up being pitted against these people, and so the second movie is almost like an attack on people who become fanboys of the first movie and take the message too literally, right? So it's just an interesting thing. And then the third movie is when he gets paired up with a female cop. And so it's, it's sort of like, now we're going to see Dirty Harry, and also in the second movie, they have him, they make a point of having him have an interracial relationship that's also sort of a free love relationship to show that he's kind of down with that element of the counterculture. So there's just all these things going on in the second movie that are just really interesting. And then the third movie is, is sort of like he's paired up with a woman, and by the end of the film, she wins him over. So the beginning of the movie, we see him kind of being misogynistic and cracking jokes about female, police officers. And then the woman who I can't remember the actress's name, but she was perfect for the role.
She was, man, I
she's
know
very. She was in all kinds of movies and shows when we were kids, but she's really great.
Daly, was that her last name?
Let me. You know what? Let's find it. I'll get it. Dirty Harry.
Tyne Daly.
That's it. She is, in my opinion, the best thing about that movie. Like next to Clint Eastwood. It's good. That's probably my favorite. Most people like the second one, but I think my favorite is the third one. And then I don't know, the fourth one is like the height of like the Reagan era. Not the height, but it's like early in the Reagan era, and it's very much it's if you watched movies like Commando and Rambo as a kid, it's the most like that. And then the fifth one is just the most confused. It's at the tail end of the glam rock era. Jim Carrey plays Axl Rose in the movie. If you can, I'm fudging a little bit, but that's basically what he does. Like, Jim Carrey is the leader of a band and he sings "Welcome to the Jungle" in a mock music video in the film. And the rest of Guns N' Roses go to his funeral after he dies of a heroin overdose that's caused by, I think, somebody poisoned the heroin or something. I forget the plot. And the movie ends with a high-speed chase through the streets of San Francisco involving a little bitty dinky remote control car that's got explosives on it. And he's paired with he has an Asian partner, and they make the Asian partner like a martial arts expert, but it's the martial arts he's doing are very like generic. It's very of its time.
Generic Hollywood fight choreography in the 80s.
Generic. This is like Asian martial arts of some kind. Is my impression of it. And it just felt really weird. That whole it's interesting just to watch for just to see Jim Carrey play Axl before Jim Carrey is who Jim Carrey is. Like this is before Ace Ventura and before I think. It's either before or just as Living Color. It must have been before Living Color, I would think. I think it came out in 88.
It came out 88.
Okay,
I'd say 88 was probably the year in Living Color came out, if I were to guess.
That was like 88, 89.
You would have made this movie before.
I think Living Color was 89. I think it came out in 89.
Was it 89?
I think so. I can't remember.
That.
But whatever. But whatever the case, he's still Jim Carrey. Like you see it, you're like, oh, Jim Carrey doing a Jim Carrey face. But the world didn't know what a Jim Carrey face was at that time. So you know what I mean? So it ages weirdly as a result, because when it came out, it wouldn't have been received the way we're receiving it with decades of Jim Carrey movies to evaluate. Do you know what I mean? It's really, really weird. Like it's when I watched it again over the summer, I was just that I couldn't get past it. That was the thing in the movie that really like it made it and it ruined it at the same time. But I don't know. I do like the conversation it has with itself, and also by that movie they turned Dirty Harry into like, he's much more domesticated by the end of that film. I would say,
sure.
And so I don't know, but it's interesting to sort of see the conversation flow over time. And the third one is also the one that has the famous scene where he's in the coffee shop and he doesn't realize it's being held up, and the woman keeps putting sugar into his coffee, and he walks away with his coffee, and he tastes it and he realizes it's too much sugar, so he comes back because he knows that she's telling him the place is being robbed. So it's and he's just so calm and cool, and he's telling the criminals like, Mary always puts like, like this amount of sugar in, and today she put this much sugar in, and so
Yeah, gotta be a signal.
Yeah. And I think the second one, so the first movie is the one where he's eating the hot dog and then he goes and shoots up the bad guys at the bank robbery. And I think the second one is the one where he literally has like a hamburger in his hand as he's, there's always these scenes like that. But yeah, so I don't know. I think the whole series is great, but the first movie is particularly special. And I think it's got a lot of depth to it and a lot of, I don't know, a lot of ambiguity that isn't apparent on first view. At least in my opinion, there's a lot of ambiguity that's not apparent on first viewing. So I don't know. Any other thoughts? I know we've kind of gone on for a while about the.
I think I've given all my thoughts so far, okay. So I think I'm good.
Yeah, obviously I had a lot of Dirty Harry, just like that was inside me that needed to come out.
I know. That's why I agreed to do this podcast with you. I knew you had to get this out.
Yeah. So. Yeah, I want to say, when I did that Dirty Harry viewing over the summer, that was like the most I've enjoyed watching anything in a long, long time. Very close to like, right now I'm going back and watching Alienation again, and I'm having a similar type of thing. Maybe it's probably nostalgia. But if it is or if it isn't, it was like magical going through and saying, I'm just going to watch all the Dirty Harry movies again, and I'm going to watch them in chronological order and really absorb like the flow over time of these movies. And I highly recommend going on Amazon and renting or buying the Dirty Harry movies and just watching them.
Yeah, I actually would consider owning this. It is a good movie. I can see watching this again.
This time around, I actually bought it. I bought it because I was like, I think I'm going to be watching this again in the not too distant future. So I'd rather buy it than rent it.
It's just the pacing, the soundtrack, all of that. I could definitely see just putting this movie on just to have it on while I'm doing things, for example.
Yeah, and it's got so many, like, the humor in it is really good. The humor is when it is a well-written movie. The writing in this movie is very good. And again, that line, well, I'm all broken up about that man's right. That line is it's perfectly delivered. It's just because Dirty Harry's like almost cartoonish. There's something like almost cartoonish about the persona with the hair and the fixed expression, like the wince that he has on his face. And him delivering that line through the gritted teeth, and there's a lot of other moments like that in the movie, but that's the one. I don't know why that line is so funny, but I think it's because you've seen all the horrible things that Scorpio has done, and then you get to that line. It's like, and they're talking about his rights, and it's like I don't know. Again, we've already covered this, so I won't go back to it. But it was a really perfectly written moment. So hopefully we'll be back on next week with Serpent in the Rainbow, because that's the big one that we wanted to do. And I've been so looking forward to doing that one, because I haven't seen it in ages, and I really want to. I really want to see if it holds up, or if I watch it, I'm like, is this what I thought it was ages ago?
Yeah, I only saw it the one time, like when it first hit cable. So I really loved it at the time. So I've got the same thing. I really hope I like it as much as I did last time, because it is such an unusual movie that I have no idea how I'll feel about it now.
Yeah, and I really feel like our Jacob's Ladder discussion will be illuminated by that movie. I could be wrong, but I feel like there's a lot in that movie that Jacob's Ladder was kind of reacting to in some way. So we'll let you go. And again, I do have the Alienation discussions up, so you can check those out. I should have another one up soon. And until then, we will talk to you later.